December 17th, 1942, 03:19 hours, latitude 5130 N, longitude 0 degrees 08 W. The blackout curtains in room 47 of the Wireless Experimental Centre at Knockholt, Kent, hung heavy as funeral shrouds, sealing out the moonless night, while sealing in the static hum of 12 TRF receivers, tuned to frequencies the Admiralty had long since written off as useless. Outside, the wind howled through skeletal oaks, rattling the corrugated iron roof like distant artillery. But inside, silence reigned. Not true silence, never that, but the taut electric hush of 100 ears straining against the crackle of white noise, waiting for a ghost to speak. Among them sat 23-year-old Margaret Maggs Calloway. Her headphones clamped tight over ears raw from 16-hour shifts, her fingers stained with ink from transcribing endless streams of 5-figure groups. The room smelled of damp wool, cold tea, and ozone from overheating valves. Around her, other Women's Royal Naval Service, Wrens, sat rigid in their wooden chairs, eyes fixed on dials, pencils hovering over logbooks, faces pale under the green glow of cathode ray tubes. But Maggs wasn't listening for codes. Not tonight. She was listening for breath. It had started 3 weeks earlier, during a routine intercept of a Luftwaffe ground-to-air transmission near Lorient. Amid the staccato bursts of encrypted Morse, something flickered, a fractional pause, a catch in rhythm, a human hesitation beneath the machine. While her supervisor dismissed it as atmospheric interference, Maggs replayed the tape until dawn, rewinding the spool with trembling fingers. There, after the final dit-a-dit of the call sign, a soft inhalation, followed by a muttered "Scheisse" so faint it might have been imagination. But it wasn't. It was fatigue. It was fear. It was the voice of a man who'd just realized he had sent his coordinates in the clear. She reported it. Lieutenant Commander Price, clipboard in hand, peered over her shoulder with the weary condescension reserved for wrens who fancied they heard voices. "Call signs are automated, Calloway," he'd said, adjusting his spectacles. "Even if a Hun did slip up, and he didn't, what would you have us do? Send a destroyer because someone swore on the radio?" Yet Maggs kept listening, not just to the codes, but to the silences between them. She noticed patterns the analysts ignored. How Berlin's evening broadcasts grew slurred after midnight, how U-boat acknowledgements shortened as patrols wore on, how the same operator always signed off with a slight tremor in his thumb key pressure, a tic born of exhaustion or nerves. She began cataloguing vocal artifacts, coughs, yawns, the clink of a coffee mug, the rustle of papers. None of it was in the codebooks, none of it mattered officially. But in the dark, in the static, these fragments coalesced into portraits. She knew Enigma traffic cold, yes, but she also knew that Operator Alpha 7 hated his shift partner because he'd muttered "Halt die Klappe Werner" during a frequency check. She knew that Coastal Command S nightly weather reports from Trondheim made the Kriegsmarine S radiomen groan. They sigh audibly before copying them down. These weren't just signals, they were lives. On the night of December 16th, everything fractured. A new frequency crackled to life, 1287 MHz, carrying a low-power burst from somewhere in the Bay of Biscay. Standard procedure dictated immediate logging and forwarding to Bletchley. But Maggs heard something else. The background whine of diesel generators, unmistakable to anyone who'd grown up near Southampton docks, where her father repaired trawlers. And beneath it, a voice, not reading code, but arguing. "Nein, nein, das ist falsch!" Sharp, urgent, overruled by a deeper voice that cut the transmission short. The burst lasted 17 seconds. The log sheet recorded only unidentified low-power transmission, probable decoy. But Maggs knew that wasn't a decoy. That was a U-boat refueling from a milch coup, a milk cow, somewhere off Cape Finisterre. And the argument? About the rendezvous coordinates. They'd been misread. She wrote a full report. Price skimmed it during morning tea, red pen hovering. "Calloway," he said without looking up, "we intercept 300 signals a day. Half are garbled, a quarter are drills. The rest are Enigma encrypted. You're asking us to redirect coastal command assets based on what? A man's tone of voice. But, sir, the generator frequency is consistent with a dozen coastal stations from Norway to Bordeaux, he interrupted, stamping "File, low priority" in bold red ink. Go back to your post and stop anthropomorphizing the enemy. That night, alone in the soundproofed sub-booth reserved for tape duplication, Mags did something unthinkable. She spliced the raw recording, unauthorized, and inserted it into the playback reel for the 040 shift. Then she waited. At 03:19, as the wind screamed and the valves hissed, the new shift, led by Wren Petty Officer Elsie Thorne, a former music teacher with perfect pitch, paused mid-transcription. "Mags," she whispered, pulling off one earphone, "this isn't just static. There's a beat underneath, like a diesel idling, but uneven." Mags nodded, her throat tight. Together, they isolated the frequency modulation, cross-referenced generator specs from captured U-boat manuals, and triangulated possible locations using signal decay curves ignored by mainstream analysis. By dawn, they had a sector, 45° and 12° live, a rectangle of ocean the Admiralty considered low threat. Mags knew what came next. If she reported this through channels, it would vanish into the same red-stamped oblivion, so she didn't. Instead, she walked 3 miles through a freezing drizzle to the Royal Observer Corps outpost at Sevenoaks, where her brother, a lance corporal grounded with trench foot, still owed her a favor. Using his emergency signal lamp and a borrowed field telephone, she patched a coded message through a civilian telegraph line to a contact at Ref Saint-Ival in Cornwall, a young flight lieutenant who once owed her brother his life after a pub brawl in Portsmouth. The message was simple. Test Echo, Sector Foxtrot Niner. Diesel signature confirmed. Recommend dusk patrol. Ignore Admiralty standing orders. She returned to Knockholt before reveille, her uniform soaked, her hands numb. No one noticed. No one ever did. But as she slumped into her chair at 06 gone, headphones back on, she heard it again. The ghost frequency, fainter now, fading like a dying pulse. And in that moment, Mags Calloway understood. They weren't just listening to machines. They were listening to men who made mistakes, who tired, who argued, who breathed, and in that fragility lay a vulnerability no Enigma machine could encrypt. The short Sunderland flying boat taxied through the choppy grey swells off Land's End at 16:47 on December 18th, its 4 Pegasus engines coughing plumes of exhaust into the salt-laced air. Inside, Flight Lieutenant Alistair Finch studied the scrap of paper taped to his kneeboard. Coordinates scrawled in pencil, unsigned, with a single underlined word: listen. He'd argued with Coastal Command for 6 hours before they relented, sending him on what his squadron leader called a charity patrol for dreamers. Now, as the aircraft banked west into lowering cloud, Finch keyed his intercom. Port observer, keep eyes peeled for oil slicks or periscopes. Starboard, monitor HF band 13.2. If you hear anything, even a whisper, call it out. Below, the Atlantic heaved under a bruised sky, waves cresting in white foam that vanished into the mist. The Sunderland's radar swept empty arcs. Sonobuoys dropped at random intervals, returned only the groan of deep currents. But at 17:03, the starboard wireless operator, Corporal Jenkins, stiffened. "It's a faint carrier wave. Bearing 215 sounds." Cluttered. "Like someone's talking over the signal." Finch leaned forward. "Patch it through my headset." What he heard wasn't Morse. It was voice, German, rapid, laced with static, but unmistakably human. "Repeat course 210, speed 6 knots, expect U462 in 30 minutes. Then abruptly, silence. Back at Knockholt, Mags learned of the interception not through official channels, but via a smuggled note from Elsie. Sunderland found them. 2 milk cows, 1 U-boat, all sunk. She read it in the canteen line, her teacup trembling so violently the liquid sloshed over the rim, scalding her wrist. She didn't flinch. 2 supply submarines, and the U-boat they were refueling gone. That meant at least 3 boats stranded in the mid-Atlantic, low on fuel, low on torpedoes, forced to abort their Wolfpack mission against convoy HX-219. The official report credited aerial reconnaissance and fortunate timing. No mention of voice analysis, no mention of Room 47, but the Germans noticed. Within days, new protocols flooded the ether. Shorter transmissions, pre-recorded call signs, mandatory voice distortion filters. The human slips vanished. For weeks the airwaves turned sterile, efficient, inhuman. Mags and Elsie sat in the green gloom, headphones heavy, waiting for a crack in the armor. Then on January 9, 1943, it came, not as words, but as music. A faint snippet of Lily Marlene humming through the static after a routine weather broadcast from Wilhelmshaven. The same recording played nightly across the Reich, but this time someone had left their mic open a second too long. Beneath the violins, a wet cough. Then the clatter of a metal stool tipping over. Mags froze. She'd heard that cough before, on a November intercept from U-109. Same phlegmy rasp. Same timing after the hour mark. That radio man was still alive, and still stationed in Brest. She cross-referenced every cough, every clatter, every stray breath, logged since August. Patterns emerged. Certain U-boats recycled operators. Certain bases reused microphones with distinctive hum profiles. Certain shifts overlapped in ways the Kriegsmarine thought secure. She began mapping voices like constellations, linking coughs to call signs, sighs to patrol durations, even the rhythm of coffee sips to watch rotations. When she presented her findings to Price, now promoted to commander, he laughed outright. "You're building a symphony out of static, Calloway. Next you'll tell me you can predict moon phases from how hard they clear their throats." But Elsie believed her. So did 2 other Wrens with photographic memories for timbre and cadence. In secret, they formed what they called the Ear Committee, meeting after shifts in the boiler room, comparing notes by candlelight, compiling a dossier they called Stimmen aus dem Äther, voices from the ether. Their breakthrough came in February. A new U-boat, U-612, transmitted its first position report from the Norwegian Sea. Standard Enigma burst. But Mags recognized the operator's keying rhythm. It matched a shore station radioman she'd tracked since October. That meant U-612 had just left Kiel, its crew green, its captain overeager. She predicted it would head straight for the Greenland air gap, where inexperienced skippers always overestimated their stealth. She sent an anonymous tip, again through her brother's network, to the commander of Escort Group B7. On February 14th, HMS Fame depth-charged U-612 to the bottom. All hands lost. The Admiralty credited sonar. The Wrens knew better. By March, the Ear Committee had developed a crude but effective early warning system. If a voice sounded tired, slurred consonants, elongated vowels, it meant the operator had been on shift too long, likely aboard a boat nearing the end of its patrol, desperate to return. Mags would mark those sectors high risk for inbound wolfpacks. If a broadcast included background chatter in Bavarian dialect, they knew the transmission originated from southern Norway, not France. If coffee cups clinked during midnight shifts, they inferred the crew was still on Central European time, meaning the boat had just departed. Each whisper, each mundane detail, became a thread in a web of human intelligence no cipher could replicate. Yet the higher echelons remained blind. At a briefing in London, a naval intelligence officer scoffed, "We have Turing's machines. We don't need parlor tricks with coughs and coffee." But Mags didn't care about credit. She cared about the next convoy, the next voice, the next breath that might betray a position, a plan, a weakness. Because in the end she knew war wasn't fought by machines. It was fought by men, and men, no matter how disciplined, always left traces of themselves behind. In the pre-dawn gloom of April 3, 1943, U-229 slipped beneath the slate-grey swells off the Azores, its diesel engines silenced, its hydrophones extended like eavesdropping ears. Kapitän Lieutenant Gerhard Schultz believed his boat invisible, a ghost in the deep. What he didn't know was that 3 nights earlier, a wren in Kent had heard his radio man sneeze during a routine check-in. Not just any sneeze, a wet double expulsion preceded by a sharp intake, a signature Mags had logged under Operator Gamma 4 chronic sinusitis, aggravated by damp. That sneeze, combined with the timing of the transmission and the Doppler shift in the carrier wave, placed U-229 within a 20-mile radius of 38 degrees. 25 degrees Dalum. The intelligence never reached the bridge of HMS Vidette directly. Instead, it arrived as a routine update to the Western Approaches Command, buried in a stack of signals, flagged as probable but unverified. But Commander John Walker, leading the 2nd Support Group, had learned to trust the whispers from Knockholt. He'd lost 2 ships to U-boats the previous winter, and saved 3 convoys thanks to uncanny hunches that always traced back to room 47. Now, as Vidette's radar swept empty ocean, Walker ordered a creeping line ahead, sonar pinging in slow, deliberate arcs. At 0512, the hydrophone operator stiffened. Faint screw noise bearing 190, sounds labored, like they're running silent but struggling with trim. Below, Schultz cursed. A faulty ballast valve hissed, forcing him to compensate with minute rudder adjustments that vibrated through the hull, transmitting a unique acoustic signature into the water. Upstairs, Mags wasn't listening to radios at all. She was listening to water. She'd convinced Elsie to request hydrophone recordings from escort vessels, illegally, and spent nights comparing them to voice intercepts. She'd discovered a correlation. Boats with fatigued crews often made mechanical errors that altered their acoustic profile. U-229's labored screws matched the fatigue markers in Gamma 4's voice. Vidette dropped depth charges in a precise fan pattern. The explosions lit the deep like underwater lightning. U-229's hull buckled. Schultz's last transmission, never encrypted, never intended for enemy ears, was a raw, guttural scream, cut short by imploding steel. Back at Knockholt, Mags transcribed the final burst not as code, but as a human event, screamed male, mid-30s terror, terminated by implosion. Estimated time of death, 0518. She filed it under Incident Report 47G4. No one asked why she noted the tone of voice, but the Germans were adapting. In mid-April, they introduced phantom traffic, dozens of automated transmitters broadcasting fake call signs from coastal bunkers, designed to flood Allied intercept stations with noise. Most analysts panicked, overwhelmed by the flood. Mag saw through it instantly. "Real men don't transmit perfectly," she told Elsie. "They hesitate. They repeat themselves. They breathe." She taught her team to listen for the imperfections, the micro-pauses where a human would check a logbook, the slight pitch wobble when reading under stress. The phantom signals were too clean, too rhythmic. Within a week, the ear committee could filter them out with 92% accuracy. Their work reached a tipping point during the battle for convoy ONS-5 in late April. Facing a wolf pack of 30 U-boats, the Allies were outnumbered, outgunned. But Mags and her team, working in shifts around the clock, provided real-time voice analysis that allowed escort commanders to anticipate attacks. When Operator Delta 9, known for his nervous stutter, transmitted Angriff by, and cut off, Mags knew his boat was surfacing early, eager to fire. She relayed the location. HMS Duncan intercepted and sank U-630 before it could launch. When a broadcast from Lorient included the sound of rain on a rooftop, she deduced the transmission was land-based, diverting attention from a real boat operating 200 miles west. By May 1st, 1943, the tide had turned. Of the 41 U-boats deployed against ONS-5, 7 were sunk, 10 damaged, and the rest scattered. Admiral Dönitz, stunned by the losses, called it Black May and withdrew his packs from the North Atlantic. In London, Churchill received a report citing improved radar, Huff-Duff triangulation, and enhanced code breaking. Nowhere did it mention the wrens who listened for coughs, sneezes and Bavarian accents, but in room 47, the work continued. Mags, promoted to leading wren, but still answering to Calloway, now trained newcomers not in Morse or cryptography, but in the art of listening, really listening, to the spaces between the signals. The enemy hides in the noise, she'd say, but the man always leaks through. Summer 1943 brought heat waves to Kent, turning the Knockholt listening rooms into ovens lined with sweating valves and frayed nerves. Yet the airwaves grew quieter. With U-boats retreating to Norwegian fjords and French ports, voice traffic diminished, replaced by encrypted bursts so brief they left no human trace. Mags feared her work was becoming obsolete, until she noticed a new anomaly, the silence itself. German operators, once chatty before and after transmissions, now went dead the moment their shift ended. No goodbyes, no sighs, no clinking mugs. It was as if they'd been ordered to vanish the instant they ceased broadcasting. That absence spoke volumes. Mags theorized that the Kriegsmarine, stung by Black May, had imposed draconian communication protocols, silence as doctrine. But silence too could be mapped. She began tracking when operators fell silent. Shore stations went quiet precisely at shift change. U-boats, however, often maintained a faint carrier wave for seconds after signing off, a telltale sign of a boat still surfaced, still vulnerable. She called it the ghost tail. Using this, she helped pinpoint U-boat locations even when they transmitted nothing but a call sign. In September, her persistence paid off during Operation Avalanche, the Allied invasion of Salerno. German coastal batteries and E-boats threatened the landing craft, and naval intelligence scrambled to locate their command frequencies. While cryptanalysts wrestled with new Enigma variants, Mags focused on a recurring voice on a low-band frequency near Naples, a calm, authoritative baritone that issued coordinates in clipped sentences. She recognized the rhythm from a 1942 transmission off Crete. Same man, same command structure. She deduced he was coordinating E-boat sorties from a bunker near Castellamare. Again, she bypassed official channels. This time, she used a back channel to MI6, leveraging a connection forged through her brother's wartime network. Within hours, a flight of RAF Beaufighters bombed the coordinates she provided. The E-boat attacks ceased. Salerno held. Still, no acknowledgement reached Knockholt, but change was coming. In October, a visiting officer from the Director of Naval Intelligence, Admiral John Jack Tovey himself, requested a demonstration of this voice analysis business. Skeptical but desperate for edges, he sat in room 47 as Mags played intercepted clips. She identified operators by cough, by dialect, by the way they tapped their keys between words. Tovey, a man who'd hunted Bismarck, leaned forward. "Can you tell if a man's lying?" he asked. "Not lying, sir," Mags replied. "But I can tell if he's tired, if he's scared, if he's reading from a script or making it up." Tovey nodded slowly. "Then you're not listening to radios. You're listening to intent." By November, the EAR Committee was formally integrated into the Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Center, not as codebreakers, but as acoustic behavioral analysts. Their reports, once buried, now reached convoy commanders directly. Mags refused a commission, preferring to stay among the headphones and logbooks. "I'm a listener," she told Elsie, "not a leader." The final validation came in March 1944. A new U-boat, U-852, transmitted its first report from the Indian Ocean. Mags heard the operator yawn mid-transmission, a long, drawn-out sound she associated with graveyard shifts. She cross-referenced sun charts and deduced the boat was operating on Berlin time, not local. That placed it far west of its expected position. She alerted the Royal Navy's East Indies Fleet. On April 3, 1944, U-852 was depth-charged off the coast of Somalia. Its captain, Heinz Wilhelm Eck, would later be executed for war crimes, but Mags remembered only the yawn. Victory in Europe came on a rain-slicked May morning in 1945. At Knockholt, the wrens gathered in the courtyard, listening not to radios, but to Churchill's voice crackling over a public address system. Champagne corks popped. Someone played Lily Marlene on a gramophone, the same tune that once betrayed a cough in Brest. Mag stood apart, watching steam rise from her teacup, her headphones slung over one shoulder like a relic. She received no medal, no citation. Her name appeared in no official history. When Bletchley's secrets began to trickle out in the 1970s, Room 47 remained unmentioned. The world celebrated Turing, not the women who heard men breathe. Years later, retired and living in a cottage near Brighton, Mags received a package from Germany. Inside was a faded logbook from U-462. The milk cow sunk in December 1942. Tucked in the back was a note from the radio man's sister. You heard his voice. You knew him. Thank you for not forgetting he was human. Mags never spoke publicly about her war, but in her diary she wrote one line that survived. Machines encrypt truth, but men always whisper it. By war's end, the techniques pioneered in Room 47 had contributed to the sinking of at least 23 U-boats and the disruption of 57 Wolfpack operations. Convoy losses dropped 78% between March 1943 and May 1944. The human signal, once dismissed as noise, became a cornerstone of Cold War signals intelligence. Yet Mags Calloway's greatest legacy was quieter. She proved that in the clamor of total war, the smallest voices, overlooked ordinary human, could shift the course of history. Not through codes or cannons, but through the simple, radical act of listening.